For my scene analysis, I chose the sequence where Jerome Tyler tells the story of the lynching of Jesse Washington, while the director crosscuts to members of the Ku Klux Klan celebrating at their initiation ceremony. I feel like this scene is one of the best examples of the director using juxtaposition and cross-cutting to communicate a deeper message about race in America. And instead of showing these events separately, he really edits them together so that the audience has time to compare them and think about what they mean. And I do think that's really important, especially when we're talking about this topic here. So at the beginning of the scene, Jerome Turner is speaking to members of the Black Student Union. The room is quiet. Everyone's really focused on his story. He describes the lynching of Jesse Washington in very vivid detail, explaining not only the violence, but also how crowds gathered to watch it and even celebrate it. Spike Lee, he uses these close-up shots and slow pacing it so that the audience can really focus on Turner's words and the emotions of the people listening. This part of the scene really encourages us to understand history from the perspective of the victims and the communities that continue to carry the trauma generations and generations after. While Turner is speaking, the movie repeatedly cuts to a Ku Klux Klan initiation ceremony. The Klan members are laughing, cheering, enjoying themselves as they watch The Birth of a Nation, a film that really glorifies the KKK and promotes racial stereotypes. This editing sequence is called cross-cutting, and because Spike Lee switches between two events happening at one time, however, the purpose isn't just to create suspense, it's also to create the comparing the two worlds that these scenes are showing, which I think is super, super important, and it plays really, really well with this movie. One group is remembering the pain caused by the racism, and the other is celebrating the belief that made this awful, awful violence happen, and it made it possible. This is where the juxtaposition becomes super important. Spike Lee places two completely opposite emotions next to each other: grief, celebration. Every time Turner describes another horrifying detail, the film comes to people laughing and applauding. The contrast is so uncomfortable, but it's so intentional, and I think that is truly what makes it great. Spike Lee is asking the audience to really think about racism and how it's remembered differently depending on who is telling that story. For Black Americans, these events, they represent trauma, loss, injustice, pain. And for white supremacists, the same history is twisted into something to celebrate, something to, happy about their achievements by these awful events. By placing these images side by side, Lee shows that the history, it's never going to be neutral. It just depends on, who's telling the story, who's talking, who's showing the representation of said event. I also noticed how the sound helps strengthen this message. Turner's voice is calm, emotional, respectful, while we hear this loud uproar from the Klan scenes filled with laughter and applause. It's kind of emotionally disturbing just from the sounds and the different things that are going on for different cutscenes. Even without looking at the screen, the audience could hear the contrast between mourning and celebration. And Spike Lee uses both sound and editing to reinforce the emotional divide going on between the two groups. I think that's really powerful. Kind of using all of our senses to really show us the different sides of what's going on. I think Spike Lee's intention in this scene is to show racism in America is not only about individual acts of hate, but is also about how the story society chooses to remember. And I think that's huge. I think that's big for all of our history as a nation, too. We have people who, they celebrate things and then they completely, break down when they're talking about these events. And the cross-cutting connects historical racial violence with the ideology that encouraged it. Instead of treating racism as something that happened long ago, Lee suggests that these beliefs continue to influence American society, and that's so true. the audience is encouraged to question how history is taught, how it's perceived, how it's met, and who gets to tell it, and also why remembering these events are important in the first place, and how we're going to go about in the future, remembering these events and telling these events. Overall, I think this is one of the most powerful scenes in BlackkKlansman because it perfectly demonstrates Spike Lee's use of juxtaposition. The cross-cutting forces viewers to compare two completely different experiences of American history and understand why they are deeply connected. Rather than simply telling the audience what to think, he uses editing and sound and contrasting images to really get their minds working and start a discussion about race and memory and the lasting effects of white supremacy in America. The scene captures the central message of the film, that the legacy of racism is not confined to the past and it won't ever be, and the understanding history is necessary if society wants to move forward, but not just move forward to be better. And I do think that is why this scene is so powerful in this movie. Thank you.